Welcome to the Drip Marketing Podcast. My name is Puya. Today we're going to be talking about headless CMS options to improve your SEO. And we're lucky to be talking to our software engineer here who's smiling at me. His name is Vahid. He's been with us for a year. Yeah. Tell us a little bit about yourself, Vahid.
Well, thank you for having me, Puya. I'm really excited to talk about all that we are going to talk about today.
Excellent.
But yeah, I think I've been with you guys for like about a year now, working on multiple projects that we planned, and the major one being the e-commerce system that we are going to talk further about today.
Excellent. You know, Vahid, I'm still confused. I will never be able to answer what is a headless CMS. What is a headless CMS, or what is it? What is a headless CMS? Can you please explain?
Sure. Yeah, I know. Like you like that word a lot. Headless.
We both have heads, but why is it better for websites? No heads for websites.
Yeah. Before we even go there, let's see the history of how we reached that something as headless. Right? It's more of a buzzword, which only means that you would not have a UI for your systems. So yeah, in order to understand why or where we are today with headless CMS and why it's called that, we need to understand a little bit of history of how the architecture and systems were built back in the day. So traditionally, we have something called as a monolithic architecture, where you have your backend, your API that serves through the database, and your UI built into one package, and you would deploy this package on a server, and it would serve all the requests that is coming through and give you all the responses, right? And as technology grew, as the internet grew, what happened was this was really restricted, right? Because if you want to scale your database, if you want to scale your website, what you had to do is buy another server, put the exact same thing on that server, and just keep continuing that to serve all these requests, and it really got complicated, right? It was not scalable. After that, what we had was the Microservices Architecture, where you would have your APIs broken down into smaller systems. For example, we create an API for something that would serve the order. You create an API to serve the user information. You create an API for your cart. And what you do is you get all this microservices deployed on multiple systems, put a load balancer or something called as an API gateway that would get the request and serve these requests accordingly. And this made all the systems that we have scale further, right? From this, that's why I was saying that headless is more of a buzzword. What it actually does is it only gives you the API, the data that you want, and it gives you the freedom to create your UI as you want for your data source. I hope that was clear.
Okay. No,
Okay.
It wasn't clear.
Sure.
But I assume everyone listening in is not going to. But let's simplify it even more,
Sure.
okay? With examples. So, for example, we're working on a website right now with 2,000 products.
Right.
And we were on a WooCommerce platform.
Yeah.
Tell me how that was working in WooCommerce first.
Okay. Yeah, if you really want to talk about WordPress, I have a personal opinion about WordPress is that I don't like it. Nothing against WordPress, but the reason why I don't like it is because it's more of a hack over something that was only supposed to be a blog site, right? If you look at the data models of WordPress, or if you look at how the things are structured in WordPress, it is not scalable if you want your website to grow in the future, right? If you're starting out, if you have a few products, that's okay. You can go ahead with WordPress. It's easy to set up, it's easy to manage, right? With WooCommerce as well. But as soon as you start integrating stuff that is difficult or technically complicated.
Let's give an example, actually.
Sure.
One example for our WooCommerce website was that we needed to introduce vendors.
Right.
And each vendor would have a store. That is no longer the case. We're not having vendors anymore. But with vendors, we used Dokkan.
Right, yeah.
And that's also another plugin which destroyed our indexation, because each vendor would have a product, then a store, and that store was indexed. And it was a whole different section on the website with hundreds of products for that store, which was indexed, and also on the website, what Google saw and what people saw. So we have duplicate content issues, and we have an indexation issue with thousands and thousands of variations of different products, but they're really one product. Right? And that's also a WordPress issue because it doesn't come out of the box with a perfectly optimized website.
Exactly. And one of the reasons why we decided to move away from WordPress and Dokkan and
all the plugins,
and all the plugins, first, it's really hard to maintain all those plugins to begin with. There is a lot of bloat that comes with all those plugins. The problem that we had with Dokkan was we were trying to implement their idea of what a multi-vendor system should look like into our idea of what we wanted, right? And that is where all the complications come in, is that when you want to change it, it is not as easy to change as compared to something that you build in-house, right? Because you have no control on how it was structured. You have no control on what you would modify and what results you would get. Again, it works for a very small use case, but as soon as you start thinking bigger and want to change it according to what you want, that's where it gets complicated.
Yes, our e-commerce website is going to be growing rapidly, and not in terms of traffic so far. It's a brand new website, but we have thousands and thousands of products we want to introduce into this database.
Right.
And we want to introduce products that are compatible with each other. Now we're talking different categories of products which are compatible with each other. How would that fare with WooCommerce and Dokkan and WordPress versus a headless CMS?
That's a really interesting question, and I shouldn't be using interesting. I should use something a lot more specific.
Yeah.
I think so. The way WordPress works, or to be honest, I don't have a lot of information on how the structure works, but I would assume that it's an API-based system where you request for something and a data would come back, and then you would render it and show the results to the user. But the problem with that is, or not a problem, a better way to do that, according to me, was using GraphQL versus the REST API that everyone else uses, right? Because to give you an example, Facebook's API is based on something called as the graph-based API, where you connect things. I should be giving you a better example. For example, you know me through work, right? But this work node would also include other people that are involved in the same kind of work, and it's easier to go through, traverse, and find that relationship versus what happens in the API, REST API-based solution is you have to query each and every node to go to that result. I don't know if I'm making this complicated.
So let's go back to you knowing me in this workplace.
Right.
We've got developers, we've got designers, we've got project managers, we've got people working all over the world. Let's bring it back to, you were saying, let's compare it with us as people, and
right.
You were going to, how will that work? Like, just consider all the people that work with us.
I'll give you two examples. One is we both know each other through a company.
Yep.
So you would look up that company, you get information about that company, who works at that workplace, right? And then what you would get back is names of people who work there. What are you going to do next is you're going to query each and every name to get information about each of those employees, right? You would not be like, oh, there are like 10 people working here, give me information of those 10 people in one request. That's one way to do it, and that's the way we are doing right now. But the other way is I'm going to make 10 requests to get all this data back of 10 different employees. That's the REST API based logic. So instead of making 10 network calls, what you're doing in GraphQL is you're making one request that goes back to that node, gets all the information that you want, and gives you that data back.
Okay. Let me give you an example on an e-commerce website then.
Sure.
Let's switch back to real life examples.
Yeah.
So would you say that I am looking for black t-shirts on a website, and on that category page, you're going to have all sorts of t-shirts, but let's say this category is built properly, and if I request, or let's say I search for black t-shirts from a brand, let's say Guess, okay?
Yeah.
Guess black t-shirts, and it shows up on Google. I click. Now, on that page, all the requests have to be made, right? When it loads.
Right.
Are you saying with a headless CMS, the buzzword headless CMS, only black t-shirts are being requested and that's going to load instantly versus, let's say, WordPress or WooCommerce or Dokkan or whatever, everything would be requested at once? You have to see all the t-shirts, and it has to load everything, all the filters, all the colors, all the sizes.
You almost got there, but there are a few things that I want to correct. Headless CMS is a package. What's under Headless CMS, how the requests are made, is using GraphQL. So in GraphQL, yes, what would happen is when you go on black t-shirts on a website, you would only get black t-shirts back, right? Because you have that ability to query a node based on what you want, versus what happens in WordPress or WooCommerce is it will look up for black t-shirts, then it would filter out, it would look up for t-shirts, and then it would filter out the black t-shirts, and that's the data that you get. So it makes multiple network calls to get you the data, versus what happens in GraphQL under Headless CMS, it only makes one network call. The less network calls that you make, the faster your website gets. But it also, there's a catch though, it also depends on what kind of data you're querying and how many levels of data that you're requesting for. Mm-hmm. But it is faster than REST API.
Okay, so tell me this, again, please excuse my ignorance. Is it different when somebody, let's say that black t-shirt, yes, black t-shirts is indexed, that is set to index, and by the way, a lot of websites don't set that category to index, big mistake. Mm-hmm. Let's say that's indexed, okay, yes, black t-shirts, and I look for that, and the category shows up on top, I know where it is, I want to click on it. Will it load differently if I click on that search results versus if I look for it on the website, like guess black t-shirts on the website versus how it would load when I search for it and it's already indexed?
Do you mean under the
under Google?
Under Headless CMS?
Correct, Headless CMS.
Yeah, so
we can make both examples. Let's just say what would happen with WordPress, which you've already explained.
Yeah.
But I'm just trying to wrap my head around, would it load the same way if I click on it from search versus if I search for it on the website?
Sure. I'm sorry, but I'm going to introduce more technical stuff here. So you better understand what's happening in the background, right? So under Headless CMS, before I even answer your question, we are using something else for the front end. As you remember, Headless CMS is only something that gives you data back and connects your backend through an API. And as we are building a UI, we are building this UI in Next.js. Again, we might be the first one in our industry to do that, to jump on Next.js and use that CDN first framework. But the way it works is it gives you options to render something on your server. That is, when you make a request, you have this page rendered on your server and it serves you that page directly from the server. Versus, there are other ways of how pages load, right? One is you would call a page and there would be a static page that no data is moving, for example, about page or our story page, or a static data that never changes. It's just text and some images. And the third one is something called as dynamic pages, where you would have some content on the page, but you would have to make a request to the API to get the information back and to show it to the user. I don't know if you have noticed, but sometimes when you go on some pages, you would see all those curly brackets that with some variable name, and then the data would load into those curly brackets. That's an example of dynamic pages. Coming back to your question of how it will load, what we are doing on Next.js is we are pre-rendering the product pages, the home page, and few category pages on our server at build time. What I mean by build time is when we build the project, all these requests are already made, the HTML is created, and we serve that HTML from CDNs. So when you click on a link from Google, it would just serve the HTML page as a static page with all the information there. which is better for SEO because you have your meta tags, you have all the information that you need. Versus when you search for something, it would do the same. It would just search for that page and then serve it to you. So there's no difference in how it's served. Versus, this is in Headless CMS, versus what happens in WordPress is when you search for something, it would make a search call, then it would get the data for that product and then serve it to you. So it has to do that work of getting the data when you search for something, versus in our solution right now, that work is already done. It just serves you the page from the server.
Okay, that actually makes a lot of sense. So what you're saying is, no matter what happens with WooCommerce and WordPress, you're constantly making that request.
Yeah.
Is there a way to hack it?
Yeah, I'm sure there are ways to do it. I just didn't want to invest a lot of time in WordPress because of my personal opinion of not liking WordPress, and we really had to get started. There are ways to improve WordPress. It's not that bad. You could optimize all the pages. You can do critical CSS, and also I think they should have a solution now, or a plugin, famously, to load static pages, or how Next.js works. I'm sure might be solutions. I just didn't think
these are hacks.
Right. Yeah,
they're hacks because yes, I know about this, and I'm very well aware of WooCommerce and WordPress not indexing critical categories and filters.
Right.
Because you'll have those categories set to no index as a default, and I would assume 90+% of small businesses would know that you shouldn't do that. And that was one of the biggest problems we were having.
Yeah, I was just thinking about that. Our devs would just move systems from like staging to production, and if we forget to uncheck that or check the no index filter, it would just no index all the pages, and then you would be, what's happening here?
that was an option. That's correct. As you're all aware, now he's more on the advanced side. Everybody, he is. I know a lot of people listening in would probably be working in WordPress.
Right.
I'll be honest with you, probably 90+% will be working in WordPress. I am blessed to say that we do have the resources to get off of WordPress, and not a lot of people do. And that doesn't mean you're not going to rank, or that doesn't mean you're not going to do well. We just want to go above and beyond in our industry, above and beyond. Even in our industry, people using Drupal and Magento and WordPress, they're not even optimizing those websites.
Right.
But we're just stepping away from that and saying, what can we do even better than using WordPress or a typical CMS? Do you know anything about Shopify? Would Shopify be similar to WooCommerce or BigCommerce? Do you know about those websites?
I like Shopify.
Or those platforms?
Yeah, I do. Shopify has a solution for Headless CMS as well. So if you want Shopify to be your backend on which you want to build your UI, they're also getting into the game. They have really good headless solution that you could use. I hate to use that word now, but yeah.
I wish it was headful.
If it was headful, you would have the UI, right?
It just sounds odd. Yeah, go ahead.
So they do have a solution, but the only problem, not even a problem, the only reason why we didn't use Shopify's CMS or the data store was because you have to pay for Shopify, versus what we're using is in-house and we don't have to pay for it. We can build on top of it. It's an open source solution. So yeah, I really improved over the last few years, right?
They're just, for what we would do, it would be way more expensive.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess if we didn't have the expertise, we would probably go with Shopify. I just want more control, and that's why I like WordPress and WooCommerce. Then I ran into all these issues and speed and plugin. Can you imagine having 30 plugins, updating them regularly, running into bugs all the time? Okay, I'm just gonna leave that. Let's just forget about that, because everyone listening in would know these issues. Let me ask you this. You've mentioned that Core Web Vitals was a thing with me. It's very important with me. It's not the most important factor with SEO, but I want to take it seriously. And we've also spoken about when a developer pushes our changes to go in production, what they do is they forget to uncheck that box so that our whole website does not index. We've had that issue, and we've used Content King. which works very well, and it immediately tells us if there's something wrong with a section of the website, the whole website, a category, products, whatever. Now, you're working on a system, and tell me if this is with the headless game.
Okay.
But you're working on a system where if a mistake happens, the developers cannot push these changes live, which is kind of like software, right?
True. So yeah, I can tell you more about that. The framework that we're using to build the UI is Next.js, but you need to deploy this somewhere else, right? Like from where you would serve it. So we have two options here. One is Vercel, which Next.js belongs to, it's their project, and the other one is Netlify. They handle all the deployment for us. What we have to do is connect source code management system to them, for example, like GitHub, which we are using. The good thing about Netlify, first of all, is they have their own plugins, not like WordPress plugins, but kind of plugins that control your optimization task, your no 404 links, or if something changes, and you could use these plugins, integrate that with GitHub. So what happens is when a developer makes changes, they have to push the change to GitHub, and GitHub would run all these tasks for us, where it would check like, oh, it has the performance decreased, or if a page is missing, or if they have unchecked something that we made mandatory, and then it would give you a status of like, hey, these are the tests that I performed, these passed and these failed. Because it was critical, I will not let you merge the code into the main branch, and that's where it stops. So you have to go back in, you have to change stuff, push that change to GitHub, it will run the test, see if everything's okay, and then you merge it to the main or the develop branch. And as soon as you merge your changes to develop branch, it gets deployed on Netlify. And you also get a preview of what changes were made. So yeah, that's what we have in place right now. So there's very little chance for developers to screw things up.
The SEOs listening in, the business owners listening in, these, I call them digital assets, people who have digital assets listening in. I'm telling you, this is a huge problem. It's just these changes, especially when the websites are large and you only have a small team managing these websites. We expect the developers, and it's not always their fault. I don't want to blame them for everything. We expect them to know everything. And you have 2 developers, 3 developers working on a project. They launch, and then you have your content team working on the blog, on the live website. And even though you have your rules, somebody doesn't follow the rules, and changes get published without what you just said, and then a lot of work gets deleted, so you have to backtrack and look at your backups. It's always been a problem. We've always had this issue, and I've heard from others they've also had this issue. So that I just wanted to make sure everybody understood again how amazingly blessed we are, because I don't think most websites are going to do this.
Yeah, it's more of a developer's workflow than what goes on the website. So if you have all these checks and balances in place, you shouldn't be able to make a lot of mistakes. But yeah, it's human nature to make mistakes. Right?
Yes. So. Would you say only software engineers do it this way versus, website developers and designers?
I'm not really sure what their workflow is, but developers do have GitHub. But if you have something like GitHub on these different platforms, and if people are controlling it, they shouldn't be able to make all these problems. But also, what we see happening in the developer world is rapidly changing. New stuff come up every other day, and yeah, it's more optimized for us than anyone else out there.
Okay, now let's jump forward a little bit. You picked Saleor.
Yeah.
Why did you pick Saleor versus all the other options, if there are many options?
Yeah. So when we started talking about moving away from WordPress, I was actually looking for the options that we could use. Saleor was not my first option. The very first option was Reaction Commerce, which is also an Headless CMS open source solution, which uses, I don't remember, but I think they are based on Node.js, and the JavaScript environment, and I tried to run it locally to see how it works. They're huge. They're bigger than Saleor, to be honest, but they had a lot of problem running on my system. Even the UI, I was able to pull it up, use it one day, and the next day if I update it, it would just crash. Not saying that they are bad. I was just disappointed. I also had my small MacBook back then, so it didn't quite work. So I was looking for what's the second best option, and I came across Saleor. I saw that they have like huge community. If you have any questions, if you get stuck, they have an active Twitter handle. I don't know if you have ever Twitter.
I have tweeted them, and I forgot the owner's name, or the person who started this whole thing.
Yeah.
And he does reply every single time.
Yeah, they're really active. Even if you have technical problems, you just go chat in Spectrum. That's for GitHub chat room, and you would get the answers. And I'm not saying that it's a perfect solution, but it has everything that you need. Plus, they are also coming up with a new version, that is version 3, pretty soon. They're working on it. So there's active development on that project right now. The reason why I liked it is because it was based on Django. It's a Python framework that's tested and used for a long time now. It's based on Django 3. That's the newest version. And a lot of it's production tested. So a lot of applications that are live right now work on Django, and it's easier. I like Django because it's configuration over, I forgot the name, but you don't have to do everything. It takes care of everything for you. And then we had the GraphQL API. There's only one problem with Saleor though that we still are trying to figure out, and that's the UI. The storefront source code that comes with Saleor is still under development. They explicitly mentioned that if you want to use it for production, you have to change it, and that's what we're doing. So we are trying to build upon that, and that would be the only problem with Saleor.
Is that why the launch date is gonna?
Yeah, it's taking forever because
you're kind of doing their work
a
little bit.
Yeah,
which is customized for us.
Yeah. But their backend system is really good. It's easy to modify and easy to extend as well.
Okay, now tell me this, and this is my final question. For WordPress, we know that there are lots of plugins and WordPress updates pretty regularly, maybe once or twice a year.
Right.
Maybe once a year, I'm not 100% sure. But plugins update often. And obviously you have many plugins, and when you update one plugin, and especially you have a larger website, it could literally break the whole website. How do updates work on Saleor if there is an update? I mean, if you build something and you update the code yourself, obviously, because with Saleor there isn't a whole plugin option. You're building your whole system from the ground up. But would Saleor have updates themselves? And when they do update, how would that affect us?
Sure. That's a really good question, and that's something that we need to discuss more about. Saleor would have updates in the future because it's being actively worked upon, right? And what we deploy in production would eventually need to be updated with what comes out. But it is not as compulsory as WordPress, because there might be a security issue and everything. But even upgrading Saleor from one version to another is easier. All you need to do is pull in the code that they release under whatever the tag they have released it. I think the latest one is going to be 3 point something, and then you can check what code has been changed before you merge that changes, right? And they do come with a change log, like, hey, this is all that's going to change, and this is what is going to break your changes. So it's the standard change log that you don't see with plugins that come on WordPress, right? They would tell you what changed and what to look out for that might break your systems. So even before going live, and if we update Saleor, we can test all these changes, see if any of the unit tests that we have or the integration tests that we have breaks. If it breaks, then fix it, and then update the live website.
I cannot see any reason why no one would want to, or anyone would want to choose WordPress now after what you've explained. It's clear for me now. Actually, it's much more clear than when you explained it before, because I've asked these questions. And
right.
many times. and believe it or not, I've asked them I don't know, 5 times. And I just look at him and it didn't make sense to me. But now it makes sense with the requests and how it's loading, with the APIs, and also how it's updated. I didn't know that, by the way. I did not know that when they update something, they tell you what they've updated. They also tell you what might break.
Yeah, these change logs come with, whatever GitHub tags they release. So you should be able to pull that up and see what's changing.
Wow. Well, it's a lot more clearer for me. I'm serious, actually. It's a lot more clearer for me. And I hope it's clear for everyone who listened. And of course, if you have any questions, please put that in the comments section. And I think we're going to get Vahid to answer them.
Sure, yeah.
I mean, this is our first podcast, and we're going to do this regularly. And the topics are going to be more advanced than your typical optimize your title tags.
Yeah.
Optimize your meta tags, and make sure you write content. It's not us. We're trying to speak about topics that are a little bit more nuanced than your typical SEO topics.
Absolutely.
If you have any questions, please leave them in the comments below. That's it for us. You guys have a great day, and until next time, catch you all on the next podcast.
Thanks, Puya.
Take care, everybody.